We are taking a brief detour from our series in the book of Mark for a couple weeks. By today, just kicking off a short series that we're calling Counting Sheep. Counting Sheep. As over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to unpack what is maybe one of the most beloved Psalms of all time, Psalms 23. And it's a psalm that most scholars believe that David wrote sometime later in his life. This would have been sort of during the kind of towards the end part of his reign as king of Israel. And it's important we start with this because I think to understand where he's coming from with these words, you get to understand a little bit about where he's come from. In fact, throughout this series, you're going to be hearing a little bit of some of the details of really some of the struggles and the challenges that God got David through to get him to where he was. It's here David in Psalm 23 is really kind of reflecting on all this. He's reflecting on all the things that God guided him through, delivered him from, carried him through. And he's reflecting on this, and he pens these words. He says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table," and this is actually the text we're really going to key on today. It says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows," which I got to be honest has always been sort of a confusing verse for me. Because I don't know about you, but I read that and I'm like, well, who are these enemies, right? Who he says, God prepares a table before David in front of them. Well, we're going to get into this a little bit later on in the series, but I think there's a couple reasons for this phrasing. One is a very kind of literal, very real phrasing. Like he's actually, when he pens these words, he's actually facing some very real opposition in his life, some very real enemies. But it's also very metaphorical as well. It's metaphorical for the things that God has brought him through. And he's reflecting on the goodness of God, not just in the good times, but even through sometimes the bad times and even the ugly times of life. Maybe the best way to kind of describe this and help us to maybe understand a little bit when he's talking about this table sort of prepared for him is, we get these few ingredients. If you're into baking at all, you're probably more than a little familiar with some of these ingredients, right? So we got like salt. Like if you were going to make like some cookies or make a cake, you'd probably start with like an ingredient like this. And how many know like these ingredients by themselves, let's be real, not very good, right? Like salts. Some of that. Not good, right? Salt, not good. And let's just be real. Salt, the interesting thing about salt, it's a little thing that goes a long way, right? And look, I wonder in life, how many of us, when we really were to unpack some of the things we're so salty about, it all started from maybe a little dig that someone made towards us when we were, a teenager or when we were younger in life. And, or maybe it's the reason we're so salty with others, maybe salty with ourselves, maybe being salty towards God is this, kind of compiling of little disappointment or little setback after little setback that adds up over time. And if we're not careful, I can kind of lead to this next ingredient, which is this bittersweet chocolate. Like this isn't just any chocolate. This is like baker's chocolate. This is super bitter stuff, right? So we got our bitter chocolate, right? And again, if that stuff is unresolved, like the things that make us so salty in life, again, it can lead to bitterness, it can lead to resentment, it can lead to unforgiveness in our lives. And then we got, some other ingredients, maybe for us, or more of our struggle is kind of the sweet, sugary stuff of life. The things that promise, overpromise, and underdeliver in our lives, right? So we got, again, sugar. Again, not good. Mary Poppins lied to us. A spoonful of sugar, not good, right? But again, the downside with things like sugar in life is again, they're basically empty calories. It's those empty pursuits in our life. Maybe we thought, oh, that job, if I just got the bigger, the better job, the better position, the bigger office, that need of fulfillment would be satisfied, only to discover, that crash that comes along with sugary, sweet, empty calorie things, right? Or how about cinnamon? Oh. All right. Cinnamon, well, there, yeah. Now, I mean, cinnamon, if you get enough of it, again, it's kind of good, but you get too much of it, it's not good because it burns, right? And again, how many of you have been burned in life? Right? Somebody betrayed you, someone rejected you, someone you trusted let you down. And this is why I say those words when he says, "You prepare a table before my enemies," is so powerful. Because I think as he's reflecting over not just the good things that God has done in his life, but even the bad and the ugly times that God carried him through. He's able to look back and see some of these ingredients, some of these seasons of his life that in and of themselves are not good. Look, how many know if you've ever baked anything, is that you can take things, ingredients that aren't good, and if you give them over to someone who's good at doing something with those things, how many know it can lead to some good things in life? And so what David's really saying through this is he's going, hey, God has carried me through these things. I've gone through some hard things. I've gone through some betrayals. I've gone through some rejections. I've gone through some heartbreaks and heartaches. And what I've found at the end of it all is a God who wastes nothing. In fact, in Romans, it says this, God works for the good of those who love the Lord. In fact, it actually says God works all things for the good. No, it's not like 50% or 70%, all things. Not just the good things in your life, but even the good, the bad, and the ugly of your life. He wastes nothing. And it's important we get this because I think it gives us some insight into where, David's coming from in this psalm. I think he discovered some things through it. When it comes to this God who wastes nothing. And I think the first thing he really came to understand was that your time is not wasted. Your time's not wasted. Look, no doubt there were a lot of times in David's life he had to have felt like he was spinning his wheels going nowhere fast. As when you read over sort of his life, there's this moment where the prophet Samuel shows up, and he's, just a little kid at this point. He's a teenager, and shows up and anoints him. Out of all of his brothers who really looked the part, the prophet Samuel chooses David. He says, hey, anoints him. Hey, you're going to be the next king of Israel. Only for David to find himself not going from that moment to the palace, but going right to a pasture. Going to this unheralded, uncelebrated job. In fact, back in those times, like shepherds were really looked down upon. And so here he is, can you imagine just the frustration in a season like that? I mean, here, you got this great call on your life, and yet here you are stuck doing this menial task, working a job that you never thought or never wanted to be working. And yet what I find fascinating is that it was during these times, that these seasons and times in David's life where he probably felt like he was just going through the motions, these were the same times that time and time again we see him draw the most strength from. Like there's this moment where he's trying to get up for taking on Goliath in battle because nobody else wants to fight him. And so, David, is trying to, kind of work up the courage and work up the faith to step out there, to take this stone and try to take down this trained warrior. And he's reminding himself, he's like, hey, and he's thinking back to these times when he was in the field, and he thinks back to the time when, I remember when God gave me the strength to defeat a lion, to take down a bear, and he's drawing strength from this time that I'm sure in the moment had to have just seemed like a wasted period in his life. And yet, interesting enough, that wasted period was the very season, the very time that God was using most to prepare him for this great calling on his life. Or I think of a time when, he finds himself on the run. His mentor, this guy he looked up to in King Saul, he's serving him like he's best friends with his son, only for King Saul to turn his back in jealousy on David. And not just go after David, but actually spend years, like he spent years on the run from King Saul's wrath. And I gotta imagine that what got him through that time, all those years on the run, was thinking back to the times of developing this heart of a worshiper. When he was all alone, all by himself, just him and God and some sheep, looking at the stars, learning to develop this rhythm of worship, this lifestyle and a heart for worship. See, it was these unheralded times, these times that it could be so easy to just kind of look at in his life and think, what a waste, that God would actually use as the very ingredients to prepare him for this great calling that God had for his life. And I think part of the reason he was able to see that and see that to the end is because I think David, somewhere along the way, he made the choice time and time again to, rather than live in it, when it came to the things he was going through, the heartache, the rejections, the betrayals, rather than live in it, I'm going to learn from it. Right? So rather than live in the bitterness, rather than live in the saltiness, rather than live in the resentment, I'm going to instead choose to learn from it. And again, I think one of the things he learns the most through the hard times, through the difficult times, even through the ugly times of life, is how we serve a God who, again, leaves nothing to waste. As look, one of the questions you got to ask yourself about David is that when it comes to David having this perspective he had, who even after all that he went through, being overlooked by his father, being rejected by his mentor, this guy he looked up to, being betrayed by his own family members, how he was able to have such a perspective of worship even at the end of all of that. Listen, I think one of the things you got to ask yourself about David is that when it comes to this perspective he had, did he get there despite those things that he went through, or did he get there because of those things he went through? As interesting enough, when I was putting together this message, I was drawn to another story that I think really speaks to this, and really kind of what it looks like when it comes to looking at this, how God can take not just the good things, but even the bad and ugly of our lives, and transform those, into some very fruitful things in our life. And it was a story that you find fast forward all the way into the New Testament. It's this encounter between a group of lepers who in that day would have been seen as literally the black sheep of society and the good shepherd, a.k.a. Jesus. Look, you got to understand, they had a belief back in the Jewish culture of the day that if you had leprosy, it was the result of sin or your wrongdoing or something you did bad in your life. In fact, I thought Les did an amazing job a couple weeks ago, really speaking to, kind of the stigma attached to that. Because maybe what was worse than just the physical ailments, the loss of limbs or the loss of feeling, in your fingers or in your body, because of all the nerve damage, was the social stigma, wasn't it? It was the being cast out. It was the being separated from community, being separated from people, being separated from those, all you knew, all you loved. I mean, it was this separation. It was this loneliness. And so you can kind of get a sense of sort of the desperation in their cries in Luke chapter 17. Where in verse 11 it says, "Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called in a loud voice, 'Jesus, Master, have pity on us.' When he saw them, he said, 'Go, show yourselves to the priests.' And as they went, they were cleansed. I love that. Go show yourselves to the priests. Now, again, a little bit of context here, the culture of the day. The reason he's sending them to the priests is because in that day, in Jewish culture, the only way you could be accepted back into society, back with your family, back to your job, is you had to be, you basically had to go in for a physical, a health checkup to this Jewish priest, who would have to check off all the boxes on saying that, hey, there's no signs of leprosy anymore in your life. And only then could you go back to your normal life. And so Jesus tells them, hey, go, show yourselves to the priests. But here's the part that really stood out to me. He says, and as they went, they were cleansed. Now think about this. I want you to just kind of put yourself in their shoes for a moment. Because I don't know about you, but if I was one of these 10 lepers, and I started making the walk to these priests, and listen, all that I can tell, all that I can see, like I've still got signs of leprosy. I don't know about you, but I'm getting nervous. I'm like talking with the other guys, like what are we doing here? Coming up with a game plan, how we can best hide the parts of the skin that still maybe have signs of this brokenness, signs of this leprosy. It's kind of like where some of us, maybe you go to the movie theater and, on your way, like you got the soda and the purse. You swing by Dollar Tree to get the, biggie size Junior Mints. Come on now, you're in church. How many of you, I know I'm not alone in this, right? It's like full confession, right? And, in fact, not such, again, in the spirit of confession, and I'm a culprit. I'm an accomplice to this. But some months ago, Holly and I, we went to a movie, and we normally always pay full price. And it's not because like we're, excited to pay $50 for like a thing of popcorn and pop. Like it's a terrible deal. But because of our very experience that we had a couple months ago when we decided, Holly, for like the one and only time she ever thought, I think, why don't we try to sneak some snacks in? And so we did. So she gets the soft drink. She puts it in the purse. She's got the Junior Mints. She went so far as to pre-open the soft drink so that way, like, you wouldn't hear that sound, right? And the reason I say that it will be the only time we ever do it is because she couldn't enjoy anything of that movie. Like she spent, 2 hours, a whole movie, just looking with paranoia, like if, thinking that a police officer was going to come in, drag her away to prison. We would never see her again because she snuck some soft drinks and snacks into the theater. In fact, there was one moment I'm like taking my soft drink and it was like, because she's pre-opened it, it's not that fizzy. And I'm like, shh. And she's like, put that away, right? Like, what are you doing? You're going to get us caught. Like, she was so anxious and so nervous the whole time. She couldn't enjoy any of it. And I gotta kind of think that's what these guys are feeling. That's kind of the anxiety that they're feeling in this moment in Luke. You got to think that somehow these guys, with leprosy, like they're waiting to be found out, waiting to be exposed. Like, because from what I can tell, I still got these spots on my skin. And yet, look, here's part of the reason I bring this up is it's amazing to me how many conversations over the years I've had with people who the holdup for them when it comes to God's call upon David, when it comes to things that God might be calling you to, the ministry he's calling you to, maybe the conversation he's calling you to have, the ministry opportunity he's leading you to, how many people, the holdup for them is this right here. Where when it comes to stepping out and what God has called them to step into, or the holdup of grabbing hold of what God has promised them, is this belief that before they can move on to the next season in life, they've got to be fully ready for that next season in life. And yet, how many know there's a problem with that? And the problem is, let's be real, you're never fully ready for any season in your life. I mean, think about it. Think parents. Like, remember when your little one was born, and you get through the delivery, the doctor puts this little life in your arms? Like, who sat there in that moment, stood there and thought, I've been ready for this. I've been waiting for this my whole life. Like, I'm ready to do this whole dad thing and mom thing. No, like, you were scared half to death. You're like, do they come with like an instruction manual? Like, are you going to give me a test? Like, I mean, at least, hey, to get a driver's license, I've at least got to take a driving exam, the rules of the road. Like, nothing? You're just going to let me walk away with this human being, this life I've now got to take care of, and you're not going to quiz me or test me or anything? And look, even if you did kind of come out of that moment, like when holding your little baby in your hands thinking, man, I've been ready for this. How many know you didn't feel that way the moment you got down to the car and they're checking out to see if you installed the car seat the right way? And it like takes like a degree in mechanical engineering to figure it out. And, you know, because the whole time putting Austin in there, I'm like, I don't know if I did it right. I don't know if this works. Maybe I should come back and get them. Again, there's never a season. There's never a season where you feel fully ready, fully capable, right? And again, this is what I'm trying to get us to see is that here's why this matters is if you're waiting until you're completely ready to go, until you're completely healed and you got it all figured out and you got no doubts and you got no questions and you got no uncertainty, how many know you're going to be waiting for a long time? And again, this is really the tension in this passage in the story because a lot of us, we've been there. No doubt some of you are there right now where you've had your heart devastated and you've had your trust broken and you've had your confidence shattered because of maybe something someone said to you or did to you, maybe something you did to yourself. And it's like you want to move on, you want to move forward to what God has for you next, but you feel like you can't. Not understanding that for God to work in our lives, it's not about you being fully ready as much as it's about you trusting that God is more than able. He's more than able. By understanding that more often than not, especially when it comes to his healing work in our life, that catch this, God heals you along the way. He heals you along the way. Again, check out what Jesus says to these guys. In verse 14, Jesus said, go, show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. Notice it doesn't say, hey, you're healed. You got it all figured out. You got it all together. Now you're ready to go. No, they start walking towards the priest, even though they couldn't see it, even though they didn't feel it, even though they still had questions and they still had doubts. But catch this, they had enough faith to trust that God could heal them along the way. Understanding something we got to get is that how many know the only thing harder than obedience is regret? As let's be real, walking in obedience, responding to those nudges, that leading the Holy Spirit in your life. Maybe it's the leading to go and pray for somebody. Maybe it's that nudge to invite a friend or a coworker to church, or maybe it's to finally go and have that difficult conversation with someone that you keep putting off. Let's be real, it's hard, and it's scary, and it can be nerve-wracking. But again, you know what's harder than obeying that call to go? Is the regret that comes when we just choose to just stay right where we are. Taking up residence in a place we were never meant to live. When we live in the bitterness, and we live in the unforgiveness, and we live in the resentment, we live in the fear, and we live in the past. But look, not just that. You know, I think the thing that also really stood out to me in this story is not just the faith it took for these lepers to go, but the faithfulness it took for the one to come back. Let's take a look at this. Luke 17, verse 15 says, one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, we're not all 10 cleansed, where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Now, quick review. Math in the morning. I know it's difficult, but we're all going to work through this together. But how many lepers had the faith to receive a miracle from God? Yeah, 10. I knew second service was way better at math than the first service. All right? You guys, yes, way to go. Yeah, 10, right? Yeah, 10. Like, how many lepers had the faith to receive a miracle from Jesus? 10. 10 lepers. Jesus told them to go and show themselves. All 10 of them heard from him. They obeyed him. And it says, as they went, they were healed. And it's incredible. These 10 lepers, they received this amazing miracle from God. And of course, you read that and you think, well, that should be the end of the story, shouldn't it? Like confetti goes off. We Are the Champions starts blaring in the background. Like that should be the end of the story. Incredible miracle. Yay, Jesus. That was incredible. But what's interesting is Luke doesn't stop there. Like to him, the big deal wasn't so much the faith of the 9, but the faithfulness of the 1. And look, I think part of why it's such a big deal to Luke was because he knew it was a big deal to Jesus. And we know it was a big deal to Jesus because he keeps bringing it up. It's kind of like that friend where something happens to them or something said to them, and they respond with, oh, it's not a big deal. But then they proceed to talk about it for like the next 2 hours. How many know it's a big deal? That's kind of what's going on here. Jesus is asking all these questions, like where's the other 9? How come it's just you, pretty much? But then he goes on to say this significant thing. They call him out and really celebrate his faithfulness and pointing out the fact that this man returns. Goes on to say, so verse 19, he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Now, the word faith that Jesus uses is this Greek word, which is actually pistis. And it speaks this deep-seated belief that it causes you to act. Again, this is not a stagnant, stationary thing, but it's this kind of faith that causes you to move, causes you to act in accordance to that belief. Now, the interesting thing, though, about this word pistis is that sometimes in the New Testament in particular, we'll read it as faith. But then other times, depending on the context, it's actually meant to be read as faithful. In fact, actually in Galatians, we get a picture of this. The word pistis is used when it's describing the fruits of the Spirit, but you get the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, you got faithfulness right there. That word there is pistis because it can be read, it's the same word, it can be read as faith or faithful. Here's what I'm trying to get us to see. All 10 had faith. 10 lepers took Jesus at his word. That they were healed, they were changed, they were cleansed. But listen, while 10 had faith, only 1 had the faithfulness to come back again and again and again, right? Only 1 was called out by Jesus because he came back. And actually, Jesus distinguishes kind of these 2 approaches in verse 17, giving this rhetorical question saying, we're not all 10 cleansed. Now, to be clear, Jesus knows the answer to the question. Like, Jesus is good at math. Like, he knows that it was, all 10 were cleansed. But what's interesting, when he uses this word cleanse, he uses a Greek word, katharizo. And in fact, it's where we get our word catheter from. I'm not going to show a picture of that. I think you guys know what that is, right? But it literally means to clean out. Now again, rhetorical question Jesus asks. It's not like he can't do the math, but the reason he asks is because I believe he's wanting us to understand something about faith. That there's a faith that believes, but then there's also a faith that abides. There's a faith that moves, but then there's a faith that sticks around that's not going anywhere. There's a faith that receives, but then there's a faith that returns and comes back. There's a faith that moves mountains out there, but there's also a faith that can move mountains in here. See, take a look at this. Verse 19, he goes on to say, rise and go, your faith, your pistis, really, it's not just simply your faith, but your faithfulness. Your faithfulness has made you well. And the word he uses for well here is not katharizo, but sozo, the Greek word for salvation, completion. In other words, listen, faith isn't finished until it's faithful. Because while faith will get you started, how many know it's faithfulness that will allow God to finish the work he began in your life? As look, I wonder for some of us, the reason our faith feels so anemic, the reason it doesn't feel like we're experiencing much fruitfulness in our life is because we've never stuck around long enough in a place to ever put down any roots. And the challenge with that is how many know you can't get fruitful life and fruitful living if there's never any roots to your life. And the way you develop roots is the faithfulness to come back to him again and again and again, to abide in him again and again, day by day by day. As many of you know, we've got this dog, this Yorkie poo by the name of Biscuit, and I'll just go ahead and throw away my man card right now because I have admittedly the girliest, most pampered dog in the world. But this little guy and I, like, we're besties. We are best buds. We go everywhere together, except for some schools and some nursing homes because he's got a, Jekyll and Hyde personality, so for some reason he doesn't get along well with kids. But anyway, which is weird because he's never been hurt or anything. He's never had a bad experience in his life. But anyway, this dog and I, like, we're besties. And one of my favorite things is I'm oftentimes the first one to wake up in the morning, and so I'll go downstairs and get my coffee, and it won't even be like a minute after that, I'll see Biscuit kind of coming down the steps. He's like half awake. He's so cute. And I'm like, hey, it's my little buddy. How are you doing? And he'll roll over sometimes, and I'll scratch his belly and start licking the air, like, love you, Dad. Like, team Dad, team Biscuit, right? Like, we're together in this, and it's incredible. It's this great moment. But recently I've kind of noticed this trend that there's some moments in the day where it's like and oftentimes it's like if you step on his tail or if he gets startled waking up, like where it's like he forgets who you are. Like there's been moments where it's like I'll come down the steps and he'll just start randomly barking and growling at me. It's like he forgot, and I have to go through the whole process. It's like Groundhog Day again with my dog. Like, don't you remember like 50 first dates with Biscuit? Like, buddy, this is me. This is Papa. This is your dad, right? This is, remember the guy who sneaks food off of the plates, to you, right? And of course, eventually it'll click and he'll be like, oh yeah, Dad, right? We do have a somewhat dysfunctional dog. So, I mean, he's a good dog. I love him, but at times he can frustrate me because let's be real, like the expectations for a good dog are so minimal, aren't they? Like, don't pee on everything and remember who I am, right? But here's why I bring this up, is I wonder if for some of us, if that's not maybe how God feels sometimes. When it comes to our relationship with him, I wonder if there's not some times where he looks at us like Biscuit, thinking, hey, what's it going to take for you to recognize and remember who I am? How much am I going to have to do before you remember that I'm the one who feeds you? I'm the one who cares for you. I'm the one who blesses you. Like every good and perfect gift, it comes from my hand. It comes from above. Which, might I add, getting back to David, is what makes those words, that opening statement, so powerful in Psalm 23. Because what so many of us tend to forget, that David was so intentional to remember, was he goes on to say, he says, you are my shepherd, which in turn meant that, hey, I'm the sheep in this relationship. I'm the one who's completely and utterly helpless without your help. I'm the one who's completely dependent on you. See, David never forgot where the source of every good and perfect gift comes from, and it comes from above. It comes from God. Like, he knew the source of his hope. He understood the source of his strength. He had no illusions of who it was who got him through what he went through. And as a result, because of that faithfulness, going back to God, abiding in him, having this relationship with him, something else he discovered wasn't wasted over the years. Was he discovered something that some of us need to hear today, is that your tears are not wasted either. In fact, there's another psalm that David goes on to write, and in Psalm 56:8, he says, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You've collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book," which is fascinating to me. I mean, think about it. That not only is God not some distant cosmic mass in the sky, but he's so close to you. In fact, another place in Scripture says he's close to the brokenhearted. Like, he's so close to you in those moments of rejection, those moments of betrayal, those moments of hurt. He's close enough to catch your tears. And not only does he catch it, it says he records each one. It's an accounting term. In other words, he holds on to it. And you might ask, well, why do you hold on to it? Like, do you get some type of joy out of watching me hurt or watching me suffer? That's not it at all. In fact, I think we get some insight into why he keeps it in Psalm 126, verse 5. It says, "Those who sow in tears will reap with shouts of joy." Why does God save those tears? Are you ready? So he could sow. So he could sow. See, the truth is again, going through some stuff isn't exclusive to David, is it? Like, safe to say, we've all got a jar of tears that he's collected over the years, right? In fact, for some of us, it's not a jar, but if anything like me, it's like jars. Like, there's that time that, a family member left me, or that, that coworker said something to me, and this is collection of tears and collection of hurt and collection of pain. And yet, what I love about our God, who leaves nothing to waste, is you can trust he doesn't even leave a single tear to waste. But he takes those tears and he uses them oftentimes, one, to sow into others, to sow some life and to sow some hope and to sow some encouragement. I remember back in my Vancouver days, I had a buddy of mine, he was a huge Seahawks fan. Him and his dad, huge Seahawks fans. And they win the Super Bowl. Well, right before that, his dad had passed away like a couple months earlier. And so I'm texting, it was a group text between him and a couple other buddies. And I'm texting him, I'm like, hey man, congratulations. Congrats to your Seahawks doing what I've given up hope that my Dallas Cowboys will ever do. And then my other buddy chimes in and he goes, hey, congrats. He goes, man, I wish your dad could be there to have watched that game as well with you. And he's like, love you, praying for you. And it was really cool. I mean, it was kind of this great encouragement, through this condolence that he sends. And a little backstory to understand, I think what would motivate him to write that is you got to understand, it came from a place of a guy who understood some of the pain that this guy was going through. Because my friend, we were talking about later on, he said, hey, those words meant so much to me. Like, hey, pastor, you're great, but that word, that simple statement, that acknowledgement of my dad meant so much to me. And interesting enough, the guy who messaged that, he had just previously, about a year or two before then, lost his son in a car accident. So he knew the pain. He knew what it was like to have some tears, to deal with the tears of loss and the tears of grief. And yet it's amazing how God took that pain and all that hurt and all those tears to sow some hope and some encouragement into the life of my friend. Look, I'm telling you, if you've never had that moment, I'm telling you, there will come a day. There will come a moment, there will come a conversation where God's going to take that pain and sow some hope into somebody else. He's going to take that pain and turn it into a purpose, a kingdom purpose in your life. But listen, not just that, I'll close with this, is that's not just sowing life. He keeps our tears, not just sow life into others, but I think also to sow some life into us. but by taking our weeping and taking our tears and catch us, taking our weeping and turning it into worship. Turning into worship. I think part of the reason that, our tears matter so much and God sees it as such an act of worship is because really what it's making a statement of, it's making a statement that I care more about you, God, than what I'm crying about. And so I'm going to surrender. In fact, another place in Psalms, it's like my sacrifice, my worship to you is a broken, contrite heart because catch this, when we sow our brokenness, when we surrender our tears and we surrender our hurts and worship to God, listen, do you realize that you're doing the one thing that angels could never do? Because let's be real, like angels are up in heaven, right? Like they're in God's presence 24/7. Like what do they ever have to be sad about? What do they ever have to be worried about or anxious about? Like I appreciate their ministry, but like they're not hanging around crying tears. Only you and I, for this limited amount of time we're here on this earth, can actually take our tears, take our weeping, and turn it into worship. Because that's what worship is, isn't it? It's this great exchange. It's where we pour out our hurts and we pour out our grief and we pour out our wounds and we pour out our bitterness and we pour out our frustrations and we pour out our doubts. In exchange, God pours in grace and God pours in mercy and God pours in restoration and God pours in hope and God pours in fresh life. Look, I want to leave you with this last verse that I think encapsulates this all. And really, I think gets to the heart of David's psalm. And we find it actually in Isaiah 61, 1-3. It says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." Look, I want to pray for you today, and I just simply want to encourage, especially those who come in here and you feel like you're going through something. Hey, you need to know that there's nothing that's ever wasted by God. Like, I know it feels like a wasted season. I know it feels like something you just want to get through and get done and throw in the wastebasket, never to be remembered and forgotten about forever. But I'm telling you, listen, we serve such a good God that he can take even things that aren't so good. And I'm telling you, when you trust him, when you look to him to get through what you're going through, when you surrender your tears to him in worship, it's amazing how he can take what's not good in the hands of someone who's pretty good at what he does. When it comes to redemption and when it comes to restoration, how he can take that pain and add purpose. How he can take what was originally ashes and create something beautiful out of it. How he can create joy even out of mourning. So God, we surrender it to you. That's our act of worship today, is to surrender it to you. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to hold on to it. I'm going to surrender it. So that betrayal, that thing at work, that frustration at home, that issue with that coworker, God, I surrender it to you. I pour it all out to you. That God, that you would pour into me some forgiveness and grace and mercy and a perspective that David had, where at the end of all that he went through, he's able to go, hey, I know where my hope and who my hope is in. And it's not in all the stuff out there, but it's in my God, it's in my good shepherd. God, we give it over to you in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.